Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Gentle Power.
This is such a special episode for me because we have a very special guest with us, Ofer Sharone, whom I've been calling Professor Sharone. I met Professor Sharone at MIT when I took my first negotiation class. I was actually an undergrad, but the class was a graduate class. And you can trace back where my journey on negotiations started. I mean, I'd like to think that it was because I come from Albania. We negotiate everything. We're this very loud haggling culture. But more formally, I was trained by Professor Sharone. And yeah, this is a very special moment. We would like to turn it over to you to go over your life journey from a perspective of Power and Negotiations, which was the name of the course that I took. And actually, we call this podcast Gentle Power because, of course, we all know negotiations and power is so intertwined.
And before we turn it over to you, I just want to emphasize how excited we are to have you on here because I think Gerta kind of breezed over it, but Ofer, you are a permanent part of Gerta's negotiation lore and her history, because in our bio, in Gerta's bio, what a very important line there is that she took a negotiations course at MIT to establish her credibility, and so you are a part of this whole journey that Gerta has had around
You're in our
negotiations.
bio. Every time we say our bio, you're in there.
And I also just want to throw in that your name is very appropriate for our audience because a lot of people are looking to negotiate job offers. So to have someone with their first name as Ofer, it could not be more perfect.
That's funny. Well, I never thought of the connection to my name. Yeah. So it's so wonderful to talk with you, Gerta and Alex. And Gerta, I do remember you from class there because I didn't have many undergraduate students over the years. So this was certainly memorable, and you were a great student.
A lot.
And and a funny story, you bring up the name of the class, Power and Negotiations. So I don't know if it was the year you were there, but pretty early on, at the end of the semester, the last day of the class, I had a student raise their hand and say, Professor Sharone, I've really enjoyed this class, but I think you forgot half of it. We've been learning all about negotiations, but what about power? And it was really a provocative question, and it was interesting, and it made me think, well, what do I mean by power, and what do people usually mean by power? And that could be different, so power may be often just associated with some kind of bulldozing tactics or kind of very forceful tactics. But of course, power, I think, in the way we talk about it in negotiations, is really getting the outcome that you desire, right? So if having power is understanding strategy, it's being able to not just go to your default modes, but to reflect, given the situation I'm facing, what's the best strategic move. Power is also building relationships, and it's not zero sum. I think that's the biggest contradiction for many people, but it's not zero sum. If the other side is powerful in crafting collaborative solutions, you benefit from their power. So I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It pains me. Well, when people hear the word negotiations, they think of asking for what you want in picturing that show Suits with the lawyers are buttoned up and kind of strong arming someone into getting what you want. And now it pains me that with AI, I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but it does use the word negotiation in a negative connotation. It's like you're negotiating with yourself, you're kind of not giving yourself what you want, or you don't negotiate your boundaries and things like that. And it really pains me that it's perpetuating that negative view of negotiations. So part of our mission has been to sort of rebrand negotiations into a very collaborative, kind, cordial, creative process. I digress. I would love to hear about your journey, and I know you also went to Harvard Law School, if I remember correctly, and
yes,
how that shapes your negotiation journey as well.
Well, okay, my journey, I did go to law school. at Harvard, and pretty quickly realized practicing law was not really what I wanted to do. So I was very passionate about getting back to writing books and teaching and being an academic. Turned out to be a sociologist. But I came out of law school with a big debt, and I had to figure out how to pay back this debt as quickly as I could. So I found a job in Japan. It's a very small international law firm, a few Japanese lawyers, but they were doing deals, like they were representing companies doing deals in Indonesia and Thailand. And they needed me because all these negotiations happen in English. So even though I was a very inexperienced lawyer, just a year or two out of law school, they threw me into very huge negotiations, $150 million project finance deals, where the other side are these very experienced partners, and here I am. So I learned sink or swim, how to negotiate, and did a lot of sinking, to be honest, at first. But I think I did learn a lot from that process. And eventually I left the law. I went back to grad school. I got my PhD in sociology. I study employment relations. I study job search.
Wow.
Things like
Yeah,
that.
very relevant. Yeah. To our
Yeah, very relevant, though not specifically law. And then I applied for a job at MIT to do research on work and employment. And I wasn't sure what they were going to have me teach. And that was my biggest concern in the interviews. Like, my research fits, but I don't have anything to teach MBA students. And they told me in the interview, the first thing was, well, we see you were a lawyer, so of course you can teach negotiations. So let's just not worry about that, and we'll focus on your research. And so then I was like, sure, yeah, I can teach it. I didn't know anything about teaching negotiations, but I had that negotiations experience. And then I discovered this tremendous field of all the research and all the studies, and many of the greatest scholars of negotiations had been with me at Harvard Law School, but I didn't even know it at the time. So that's how I ended up teaching negotiations at MIT Sloan when you were a student.
when I was there, yeah. Wow, what a journey. Go ahead.
So yeah, so it's actually a very, very meaningful course for me to teach, because it's the longer I teach it, the more I realize just how deep it goes beyond what we normally think of, just little business transactions or job salaries, which are, of course, really important things in people's lives. But the process of learning to be a negotiator is really the process of learning about how we interact with others and the assumptions we bring to these interactions. And really, like, at the deepest level, are often untested, habitual modes of thinking about our relationship to other human beings. So when we get really deep into negotiations, I think it opens up our world in very profound ways. So it's a very meaningful thing to teach.
Wow.
I have a million questions.
Yeah, me too.
You go ahead.
Oh, well, when you were earlier in your career, when you were working for that Japanese company and negotiating deals in Asia, I'm curious what kind of negotiation tactics or strategies you saw there that are applicable here in the US or in other countries, or more generally applicable, and then what necessarily wouldn't work. And I asked this because we had a past guest. He was from Japan, and he was telling us about Japanese negotiation tactics and how different they are. There was this one concept he talked about. It's called nemawashi. And it basically means the negotiation happens before the meeting. The meeting is purely just to confirm, but all of the deal making and the trading and arriving to the solution should actually happen before both parties get in the room. And so I'm curious if there were things that you picked up from that experience that we could apply here in the US, or people can take first principles away from.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, the thing that's striking about Japanese negotiations that occur among Japanese companies, which I only had limited insight to because I don't speak Japanese, but they can be super short, and because so much of the understanding, like you said, actually is built before the negotiation, and it's the kind of negotiation that can happen in a very high trust environment with very long relationships, long enduring relationships, which characterize the Japanese economy much more than the US economy. So one of the funny and interesting things that I would see over and over is American lawyers, business people coming over to Japan to negotiate. And they would prepare themselves by reading about negotiating with the Japanese or the Japanese ways of negotiating. And so they would come in with this mindset of, we can, try to negotiate like the Japanese. The problem is that the Japanese are reading books about how to negotiate with the Americans. And so they are expecting these cowboys to come in who are, not at all relationship focused, all about just hardball tactics, so they're playing hardball. The Japanese are playing hardball because that's what they're expecting from the American side. The American side is, expecting some very, deep trust, kind of in-group kind of negotiation of style, which is often not what they're finding. Everyone is very confused.
And were you caught in the middle of any of this and you had to translate either side?
Yeah, I repeatedly would say to people, look, let's just, forget what you read about the other, culture. Like, we are all we have much more in common than you think. Like, we're all in this business, corporate law, little micro world, and we have much more in common than what separates us. And, so usually 99% of the time is much more useful to try to understand the moves of the other party, not through a cultural lens, but through strategy and through thinking, the same way you would with an American counterparty, imagining what their best alternative is, what they think your best alternative is, the kind of very nuts and bolts kind of factors that would drive reasoning. So it's the unusual case where culture comes to play. A thing I also observed in Japan was, because of these cultural perceptions, there was, or the fears of the other party about, so the Japanese client was very concerned not to get taken by the Americans. And so the Japanese lawyer that I was working with, he was very aware of their client's concern, even though he understood when he dealt one-on-one. So it's a really interesting difference watching the partner I was working with in Japan negotiating one-on-one with American lawyers versus what happens in front of the clients. And in front of the clients, it was a bit of a show, like, I'm going to show you how tough I am in protecting your interests, playing hardball with the American counter. But then really behind the scenes, when you get the clients out of the room, much more productive, collaborative type of work happen, which I think that a takeaway from that is to really think about audience effects and how these can be really distorting the process if you don't get all the parties on I think here the mistake of the lawyer was really not educating their client enough about what would be the most effective strategy, and just kind of assuming the client will not understand that and needs to see this performance of hardball. As I was inexperienced at the time, but now, given everything I've learned and experienced, I would take a very different approach.
Wow, that's so insightful.
Yeah, I just want to make an observation how I see the student-teacher dynamic here, because you're just listening very intently and you say something that sounds like, audience effects.
Audience effects. I wrote it down.
You said it out loud, audience effects, and you wrote it down here.
Old habits.
Still taking notes.
There will be a quiz later, right?
I already passed this class. I don't know if anyone else has dreams of not putting in the final or not passing the final. Like sometimes
Yeah, you wake up in the middle of the night. It's like, oh my gosh, the test is tomorrow.
Hand
at
off
9
the
a.m.
homework. That's funny. So I think most of our audience is listening because they want to learn. They want to better learn about job offer negotiations. And when I think of you, I remember we were in our class. It was either we were role playing some big business deals or like big political negotiations. At the time, I wasn't thinking about job offer negotiations, but your background in work and employment is so relevant to our audience because most of our clients we are helping them with job offer negotiations, and then we also do some business deals and acqui-hire deals, M&A, all of that, but mostly job offers. And I'm curious if we can dive deeper into that. So how are you thinking nowadays? Or, can you just brain dump everything you know about negotiations and job offers? Maybe I'll make it a bit more specific, which is people are nervous, lots of layoffs left and right, AI, replacing a lot of our workflows. How are you thinking about work employment negotiations in this environment?
Sure. So I think if I can just step back, like any negotiation I enter or advise somebody about, I think about what's the nature, what kind of negotiation am I entering? And, we can kind of think of negotiations as differing because in some cases, the relationship is by far the most important thing. In other cases, the stakes are much more important. So, the first case, maybe you're, talking to your spouse over where you're going to dinner, of course, the relationship matters so much more than where you're going to dinner. But then, if you're buying a house or a car, then the transaction matters much more than the relationship. You may never see the person more than once, if at all. The job offer negotiation is one where both of these things really matter. Mm-hmm. The relationship matters a lot. This is who you're going to work with going forward. So the interview process and the negotiations that happen really are the launch point of a future, hopefully productive career relationship. So very important. But also the stakes are significant because the starting salary can really differ, and then all your future raises are going to be based on that initial amount as usually some percent of it. So I think in this kind of case, I think it's worth negotiating. It's not like the married couple, where are you going to dinner, where I just might say, don't even worry about it. Stakes are so low. Here, I would say the stakes sufficiently high enough that it's worth trying to negotiate. But you want to be really thoughtful in how you do it in a way that builds and enhances the relationship. And I think this is the key, is that the fear you're talking about, I think, comes from an assumption that negotiations have to be this combative, something that could be very risky to the relationship. Whereas I think if we take a different approach to the negotiation, it could be something that enhances the relationship. So that would be my starting point, is to think, how can I negotiate in a way that will really improve, enhance the relationship? And so the way I think about a salary negotiation, given that context, is to treat it as a joint problem-solving exercise. Not, so it's the very opposite of trying to come in with some kind of, anchor setting, extreme position, and then they do the opposite and you meet in the middle. No. Mm-hmm. You come in, ideally as the job candidate, you already have an offer from them. And so they went first. Then you come in and you want to be very transparent about where your thinking about this comes from. And, so I do advise doing research. Your research will never be as good as their research.
Right.
They will have better data, yes. But I still think it's the right way to begin the conversation is with your own research, because that's a legitimate, very legitimate professional grounds upon which to have the conversation. You're setting the terrain as like, we're trying to figure out what's the correct answer to this question about, the market for someone in this position with my qualifications. What's the market rate? And that, and you're inviting a joint discussion about this, and you're bringing your own, what you've discovered about that, and you're inviting that from them, and then you're going to sit side by side looking at the data and trying to figure out what makes the most sense. I often am doing role play with students in salary negotiating exercises. And, compared to the other things students or people think of bringing up to justify different salaries, I think this is the strongest. So students will, in role play, try to make the argument, well, New York City is really expensive, San Francisco is really expensive, so I need more money. I don't think that's very persuasive to the
Right.
to the employer. It's not their problem. All the candidates are going to be, you're willing to live in San Francisco, you applied for a job in San Francisco. So I think that's not a great approach, but I think the employer does care about you feeling that you're being treated fairly. They've made you an offer. They must really like something about you. And so they want you to come and be happy. So they have a stake in you, the candidate, that you're getting the fair market rate for your salary. So this is a very legitimate basis for the discussion for what the ultimate salary would be.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I have more follow-on questions.
No, go ahead.
So, well, first, I am seeing how so much of what we teach today and a lot of things that we often say, Gerta often originated it, and I see exactly where it came from, because we also talk about how the relationship is really, really important, especially, and if you start negotiating very hard, then a company might think that you might not be happy there, even if you accept, which could translate into you being a flight risk. Maybe you leave the job 6 months in because you didn't get the money that you had wanted. And so there are all these things that are very similar. One thing I would love to dig a bit deeper on is around the market research aspect. And so we do, there are lots of resources out there, levels.fyi, Blind, Glassdoor, where people can get a general sense, but we often don't recommend people to over rely on the research, because just like you said, the company always has better data than you. Most companies, even small startups, will pay tens of thousands of dollars to employer reported, very accurate compensation data. Whereas for the candidates, they just have to go on blind.fyi and look at anonymous reports of possibly disgruntled employees, And so, but one thing that we have also found is, let's say even if the candidate had the perfect data and they brought that into the conversation, what we've been seeing is employers are always prepared with any number of canned responses to just basically dismiss what you say. And so even if it was correct, they'll come back and say, oh, thank you for doing that research. For this role right now, we have a compensation philosophy based on A, B, C, and so this is what we're paying. And so at the end of the day, the research that they brought in, even if it was completely right, it kind of didn't matter because the company will be prepared to just dismiss it. So I'm curious your thoughts around that, because that's why we tell people it's good to look at the numbers, to have a general sense. You're in the ballpark, you're applying for the type of role that makes sense for you, but then to not get too deep into the weeds on it.
Yeah, look, I agree with you that the company will always have more accurate data. They're going to have their standard response, of course. But I think that the key thing here is that this is the way to initiate and justify the conversation on a very professional basis. Like you're having a discussion about the market and the market price for. So I can't think of, so even if you're not convincing them that your number is better than their number, I think what you are convincing them of is that you're not coming in this aggressive power game mode, which would lead to the risks you're talking about, that they might think you're a flight risk, you're going to be unhappy, you might sour the relationship. So I think the biggest thing here is you're sending the signal of yourself as a very reasonable market actor who is willing to listen to data and to discuss and talk. And and so there's like a signaling function to the fact that you've done your research, even if it's never as good as theirs. Now, the research I think candidates do never points clearly to a number. It will, at best point to a range. Mm-hmm. And I think that's useful. And the what I typically advise is thinking of the arguments of why you belong on the upper end of this range. And this is where I think the candidate should really put themselves into the shoes of the employer and try to think, what is it that this employer likes about me? They had a lot of different candidates they could have chosen. Typically, if it's a good job, they had hundreds of applicants. But you, Alex, you got the offer. So why, so this is a little bit of detective work, you're trying to figure out what are the few really special things. And then those are going to be your most persuasive bases for why you belong on the upper end of the range, so you kind of say, I have this unique experience, I have this qualification, this education, this whatever it is that you've realized they really like about you. I'm really good with people. And then you say, and for this reason, I think I'm on the upper end of this. And that's how you begin the conversation. I think with that approach, there's almost no risk that they're going to walk away from you and say, you're so unreasonable that, we don't even want to, we're going to retract the offer. Now they may meet what you're asking for. They may move towards you, or they may not move at all. Mm-hmm. So I think all these things are possible. And just because they don't move at all doesn't mean it's not a good offer. I think this is where you really have to consider, why are they not moving towards you? And here the research can also be helpful in letting you know that maybe their offer is actually very generous. If I can share the story of my being hired by MIT Sloan.
Yes, please. Would love to hear it.
Could be useful here. So, I was in a sociology PhD program at Berkeley. And in sociology PhD, part of the training as you're getting ready to go on the market to get a professor job is negotiation. They really, you're trained that they're going to lowball you and you really have to stick up for a higher salary. So here I am. I applied to MIT's Sloan School of Management. And they make me an offer, and I know they're hiring me to teach negotiations in addition to doing research.
You have to negotiate.
Right, of course, right? So I'm trained by sociology to negotiate, and then I'm being hired by a school of management to teach negotiations. So I'm on the phone with the dean. He's giving me the details of the offer. It's a very generous offer. But of course, I say, as I train my students, can I have a few days to think about it? Can I get back to you? And he says, yeah, you can take your time, but I'm just going to tell you up front, this is not negotiable.
And a trick question.
So I was stunned, to be honest. I really was stunned. And did not handle the rest of that conversation very well just because I was so surprised, but I got out of it. I'm like, okay, thank you. I'm going to, I did continue to express enthusiasm, which is good, that I'm very excited about this opportunity. Just need a few days. And then I called, there was a professor at MIT Sloan who I knew liked me. He was kind of he was rooting for me. I could tell we had like more personal connection through the interview process. So I contacted him, and I said, "Here, this is what the dean told me. What do you think?" And he said two things. It's like, is our offer higher than any other offer? Of course it is, because MIT Sloan was paying at the highest level, and they've done their research.
Yeah.
They were paying higher than everybody. So it's not negotiable, partly because they know you don't have a better offer, so this is one case where even though they're not moving, it doesn't mean it's a bad offer. It was a great offer financially. Right. But then the other thing he said is, yeah, we have a policy of not negotiating salaries, but you can negotiate moving expenses, because I was coming from California,
Cross country,
and research budget, because I'm kind of unusual. I do this qualitative international research, so it's a little more costly. And so those things were negotiable. So I got back to the dean and I raised these 2 points. I said, I'm really happy with the salary, no negotiations there, but I could use a little extra on the research budget. And they were very, very generous, and doubled the research budget. They doubled the moving expenses. So that worked. I mean, so one of my takeaways from that whole experience is I didn't really do my homework. I should have done research about schools of management and MIT, and I would have been less surprised and better handled that first conversation. I wouldn't have been caught off guard regarding that it's not negotiable. I could have easily learned that had I done my research. Mm-hmm. And then the other takeaway is, just because salary is not negotiable doesn't mean other things are not negotiable. And I see this over and over. Like, there's, companies, often governments have set rates. When there's unions involved, it's more rigid around salaries. There's a lot of reasons why companies may have a pretty rigid initial salary level, but they're often much more negotiable on other things like vacation, working remotely, the exact title you're coming in with, which office you're going to work in. These things actually matter so much. I think one of the mistakes that job candidates make is that they put all their focus on, am I getting, 120 versus 125 to start, something like that. And whereas that 5,000 is really not going to be as important to their well-being as other things they could put their energy towards negotiating. Like, maybe they want to work from home, or maybe they want to tweak their position to include something else that would be meaningful. Like, think about what your priorities actually are, and that exact number of the salary is just one thing, and it may not be the most important thing you can negotiate.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. What a journey. Now I'm like, what if you got an offer from Harvard Business School? What would have Sloan done? I'm very curious. I want to take this conversation a bit in the direction of AI, which is all we talk about here in Silicon Valley. How are you thinking about AI and negotiations, AI and work and employment? We can go, high level, and then we can go deeper if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, has the rise of AI changed anything that you teach in your course or influenced what you are teaching to your students?
Not yet. Well, it depends which course you're talking about. Yeah, when I teach about American society, we talk a lot about AI and thinking about the future of employment. And, there's really healthy debates, interesting debates about the impact on employment in the future. And I think the truth is that the best research minds disagree. Like, we really have very different kind of projections about the effect of AI on employment. So I think it's hard to know the exact fallout. I think that one thing we can guess reasonably is that the more what you bring to the equation are things that an AI cannot do well, the more, likely your job is going to only grow, right? So there are things that, the human touch and the human connection and trust that really we as humans still will have an advantage foreseeably in. One thing I would say about hiring, and I've not made this connection, I've not thought about it too much, but in my own research about hiring, what I see is particularly in like white collar professional world in the United States, that hiring is a chemistry game. That's what I call it, chemistry game. So much hiring depends on whether there is chemistry between the hiring manager and the candidate. And that seems to matter often way more than, the technical answer that somebody gave in an interview or the exact matching of the experience on the resume. And I think this is something candidates may not always be fully aware of. I think we tend to think a little, from my perspective, naively, that hiring is this kind of more meritocratic process where you're really being evaluated for, do you have the right experience and the right know-how? And if you can just communicate this know-how and experience, and if that you're the best candidate in those terms, you will get hired. I think that really misses the human dimension that drives a lot. So like there's going to be the way I think of it is the technical know-how, there's a threshold level, but you have to be above it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're not even in the running. But once people are above some threshold level of technical know-how and competence, then really the ultimate decisions are made much more based on human connection. And do you appear trustworthy? Are you likable? Many of jobs in professional America, unfortunately, require a lot of long hours. I'm not for this, but it's a reality. So in hiring, people think like if I have to be stuck in the office or stuck in this is the research from Lauren Rivera talks about the airport question that people think about. I'm going to be stuck in the airport with this person, probably for many hours on layovers in Chicago. Is that going to be enjoyable? So there is this chemistry component, more in common with dating than we would like to admit that happens in the hiring process. So I think it's important for candidates, to understand this and to recognize this is humans making decisions about humans. But I think, so bringing it back to AI, that humans are still going to want to work with other humans, I believe, to an important extent because of the kind of mutual support and camaraderie and the connection that we need in order to really thrive. So that's at the highest level. At a very granular level, one thing I do with my negotiation students is I have them use AI to practice negotiations, and they go on ChatGPT and tell it, okay, you are negotiating with me for this job or this car.
Yeah.
And then they practice back and forth
Through the voice feature, or yeah.
I think either way, you can do
way.
text or voice. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, at a very granular level, it's a good tool for practicing. Mm-hmm. I think the AI is good at imagining how a typical negotiator would respond. Mm-hmm. So you can anticipate, use it as a tool to develop an good forecast of how the other side may negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like your point about how that the whole idea of the chemistry test, because what we have found, especially when a market is tough, then the culture fit is usually more important. If it's an employer's market and it's more competitive for candidates to get a job, by the time a company has whittled down to their final list of candidates, every single person is more than qualified on meeting the requirements, meeting the qualifications. So usually what we have seen is the differentiator is if they think they're going to like working with you. Because then, they'll have to, just like how you mentioned the airport test, like they'll be working alongside you, being with you in the office, traveling together. So I think a lot of people, especially we see a lot of more technical, kind of straightforward engineers and who maybe have not put as much emphasis on the people skills, on the soft skills, but we're seeing that in this market today, and probably more so going forward, it's even more important to think about the relationship, think about how showing that enthusiasm. That's something we tell our clients all the time. You always want to show excitement, enthusiasm for the role, have them feel that you want to be there if they give you an offer and if you accept.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's right. And unfortunately, I think for most good jobs these days, it's an employer's market. So we have a lot of crappy jobs in this economy, and then there's good jobs. Those are hard to get, and by definition, they're going to have a lot of applicants. And so I think often in those cases, it's exactly as you described, that all the top candidates are qualified. They're above the threshold. And so then, so the decision often comes down to, more interpersonal connection factors. And this is where a referral could also make a difference, and like the networking aspect, which I think job seekers sometimes underestimate the value of a referral. So it's not simply working in rational ways. But so part of what can happen with a referral, if you have an internal referral, is I'm a hiring manager. I'm sitting across from you, Alex. Gerta, I don't know you. We're just having a conversation. You seem nice, but I know that you're friends or you have a good connection with this person in my company who I really like. And so the behind, maybe even unconsciously, what's happening is I like this person in my company. They're friends with you, so therefore I assume I'm going to also like you. There's this transference, we both are friends with this other person. We're likely to like each other. So
danger of being referred by someone that is not well liked in the company.
Yeah, but on so if you know that this person is like a problematic, then maybe don't use that person. But if you don't, all else equal, you don't know, it's better to use the referral because, just merely knowing that you know someone in the company gives you an advantage.
Yeah. One more question on the AI front. How do you feel about people using AI to write emails or texts, especially in job offer negotiations? Maybe your take will change over time, but right now, where are you at?
Right now, I like using AI as a proofreader and to ask. It can catch typos, mistakes, sometimes give substantive ideas. But I think there's a risk relying on it to generate the first draft that you become very generic sounding. It's really taking out your personality and what makes you distinctive doesn't really then come across, right? So I think holding on to what makes us unique and the special thing we're bringing to the equation is really, really important. We were just talking about this interpersonal connection, the likability, all these things that make you distinct other than, so that the employer is not just this kind of rational maximizing machine looking for like the most competently written email. Right. That's not how humans work. Like they're looking for someone, they're looking for the person behind the email that they can feel a connection with. The personality and the special style. And so there you lose that, I fear, if you're letting the AI do the first draft.
Yeah.
That's actually, I think that's a good rule of thumb, because I think most people will use AI to generate the first draft, and then like I'll at least have a starting point to go off of. Then I can turn it into my own voice. But that feels riskier than your approach, where you should write the first draft. That's it, your original ideas are there, and then AI comes on top to just help like fix things, or if you know. And so I think flipping that script is probably a better approach.
Yes, I think there's a real risk if you let the AI write the first script that influences you way too much. It limits your. So first of all, our brain doesn't like to do work when it feels it doesn't need to, you know? So like, oh, okay, this sounds good enough. Maybe I'll tweak it a little bit. But I think you're going to be at the most creative when you're just staring at the blank page. And yeah, it's going to be a little effort, but you'll do something that's more in your voice for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on, you briefly mentioned the concept of anchoring, and we get asked that a lot, like, oh, they're asking me for a number. I feel like I should give the company my preferred number, and because I don't want them to lowball me, and, you know, maybe I aim high and maybe they say yes. We have our own take on that, but I don't want to influence your thinking on what our take on anchoring is. So I'm curious how you think about it.
So I would do everything to avoid giving them any number until they make me an offer. So here, I think there's a real risk. So a lot of this depends on when in the process, the timing of when we're talking about. But I assume by your question, this is an early on in the process question, maybe in this first screening interview, they're asking for a number. I would try everything to avoid answering and, you know, diplomatically putting that off, because yeah, there's a temptation two ways. You can be tempted to lowball yourself because it's early. You don't want to be ruled out for asking too much. You don't know exactly where they're at. So you might go lowball and then you're stuck with this lowball. If you go high, you know, big risk that they will say, okay, like, it's a waste of time. We have these other candidates who are more reasonable than you. And the problem you have giving any number at that stage is that they don't really know you yet. They don't know why they like you. They're in this, I forget which some other negotiation theorist wrote that this is like they're in shopping mode, not buying mode.
Right.
You know, so they're like looking through all the different products, just trying to like whittle it down to a short list. So you don't want to you want them to evaluate you on the quality of the product, not based on some number that. So yeah, I would say I would indicate something like, I'm sure, you know, salary is not going to be an issue, but at this stage, I'd like to learn more about what the position entails. You know, so you indicate you're going to be reasonable, but, you know, it's also, it's very legitimate and fair and reasonable of you, the candidate, to not talk about numbers before you know about what the position is. You know, so different positions are going to affect how you think about the associated salary. So you would want to know about what you'll be doing, the opportunities for promotion. You want to know the colleagues. So it's very legitimate to stay substance focused on what is the job. You know, you're very interested, but you want to learn more, and to shift the conversation in that direction. That would be my strategy.
Wow, I'm everything you're saying, I'm like, wow, that's exactly what we tell our clients too. And then I realized, because you learned from Professor Sharone.
I think it's because we probably both deduced this from first principles, because I don't think I remember. Well, I took the class in, I think it was 2010 10. So I don't think I remember 15 years later exactly.
And I'm not sure I was, so
Yeah, I
clear
don't
on
think
this stuff back in
we didn't talk
2010.
about job offer negotiations as much back then, but I think
Yeah.
it's the first principles
Yeah,
aspect.
definitely. But and then I'm curious, just as a quick follow up, for what about anchoring when it comes later in the process when they've made an offer and thinking about counter offering? Because a lot of people will ask, they've given me a number now. Should I ask for X% on top of that, or this much on top of that? How do you think about anchoring at that stage?
Yeah. I think anchoring has a role in some negotiation strategy, but I don't see it as so relevant in the context of salary negotiations with an employer. And the reason is what I was trying to say earlier. It's a negotiation where relationship is highly, highly important. And anchoring is a bit of a game. It's a bit of a power game that could be, I'm more likely to use it in a more like purely market transaction that's like a one time, I'm negotiating over a car or a house. In a salary negotiation where the relationship is so important, I want to be a lot more transparent about where I'm coming from and come in with, as imperfect as it is, here's, I've done some research about what the market is for this position with someone with my qualifications, and I see this range, and then so you're very open even about the range. You're not, it's the opposite. Offering a range is the opposite of anchoring. With the anchoring, you always would only offer the high end of the range, but you come in with the range. It shows a transparency, and then you say, and I believe I belong on the upper end of this range and you tell them the things you believe are strongest about you from their perspective, what they really like and value about you. So this approach that I'm suggesting is really keeping in mind two different things that I'm balancing. So I'm balancing my chances of getting a better offer from them, but I also have an interest equally, if not more important, in developing a good relationship and coming across as a very reasonable person to do business with, right? So these things are both really important, and to try to achieve both of these goals at the same time, I'm suggesting this strategy of joint problem solving, which is, I'm not saying that's always appropriate for every negotiation, but in the case of salary negotiations, because of the importance of the relationship, I think that makes more sense than now the approach of like percent over what they offered. It's a bit arbitrary, So look, I think it's stronger to come in. So if someone came to me, if I was an employer and someone came to me and came back with a number that was like, say, 20% higher than what I offered, of course, my question immediately back to them is, where does that number come from?
Right.
I mean, that's what the employer, I think, will very likely will ask, implicitly or explicitly. They want to know where that number comes from. And even if they don't ask, you should tell them where that number comes from. And it's not persuasive to say, I'm coming in with this number because it's 20% more than what you offered.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot more persuasive to come in and say, because I've done research, through my network, I've talked to other colleagues who work in a similar position, and this is the range I've come up with. I think that's a lot more persuasive. I think the 10-20% is something to think about in your own internal evaluation of what may fly, but I don't think it's persuasive as a reason for why you're offering your number.
Yeah. And I really like how you position that, where you were saying if you say this, then of course they will ask this. And I notice a lot of the time when we work with our clients, they want to say something, but they haven't thought that the logical move from the other side will be something that it's not to their benefit. So I'm like, one of my sort of coaching tips is like, make sure to think several steps ahead. Like if you say this, what will they say?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the most important one is to justify any claim you're making, you know? So when I do these like role play with students and I say, you know, the offer is 64,000 and, you know, do you agree? And they come back and they say, how about 70? and I say, and that's all they say. Like, of course I'm going to press them like, well, where does the 70 come from? You know, where does that number come from? You know, of course I'm going to ask that. And they don't have an answer. And then they're not well prepared. This is where maybe the AI simulation could be helpful. You know, I'm sure the AI would ask you, where does this number come from?
I hope so, yeah. We occasionally poke around the AI to see how it does with negotiations. I'm just very careful with negotiations because so much is on the line that I notice every once in a while it says something irrational, problematic, or just misguided, and I try to stay away.
But it's very convincing,
so convincing.
even when it's going down
yeah.
like the wrong path, right?
Yeah.
It's always very confident, yeah.
Right. We have to ask you what we ask every guest, which is, what are your hot takes on negotiations? It could also be on power specifically, or both.
My hot take on negotiation. So I think relationship and human connection matter for a lot more than people think often in terms of getting good outcomes in negotiations. And, you know, I'll tell you a story because this relationship is clearly really important in a salary negotiation. And I gave the house buying example as one where relationship is not so important. But I'll give you an example from house buying. So this is when my family was first moving to the Boston area after I got the job at MIT. We found a house in Lexington that was really perfect. Like we fell in love with it and could imagine our kids there.
Yeah,
This
Lexington
house
has
had
the best schools. Alex and I have lived in Boston for a long time, so I can imagine all these cities you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, very good school system. A little too high pressure in the high school, but elementary school was great. But so this house had 11 offers.
Wow.
You know, it was a bidding war essentially, and we didn't have the money we didn't have the highest bid. But we wrote a letter to the buyer, just like basically saying why we love this house and why our kids, you know, would just feel so right at home there. And like details about how their basement was just like exactly the dream basement for our children. We included a picture of our children and we got the house. We got the house.
Was this
Now,
an
this
email or a physical letter?
It was I think it was an email with an attached, the letter was attached to the email and the pictures. But not directly. We gave it to our real estate agent and our realtor gave it to the other realtor and they gave it to together with our offer. This person turned down higher offers with more money to sell to us because they felt this connection with our family and they wanted their house to be going to a family that would really appreciate it and enjoy it, and it gave them a better feeling. You know, they walked away more happy even with less money because we had this connection with them. I think that I share this story because this is a case where we don't even meet in person and we will never have a dealing with them again, you know? Like, I don't even know who they are. But even in that context, the human connection played a huge role. So, of course, it's going to be that much more powerful in cases where you're meeting in person, where you're going to be working together, or it's a negotiation with many of our negotiations are, repeat negotiations with people who are really important to us. Our children, our spouses, our friends, family, employers, colleagues. So I think forefronting the importance of relationship and then thinking about how do I negotiate when relationship is important. And so, hot take, consider the relationship, don't underestimate the value of human connection. Mm-hmm. I would say then at the same time, don't shy away from negotiating just because the relationship is there and you don't want to rock the boat. I think you want to, because what often happens in this scenario is the relationship is so important, so you don't negotiate, you're afraid of rocking the boat, but then, I gave the example earlier of dinner with your spouse, you may not negotiate, but, if you're talking over time, and like over the next 20 years, this is going to be really important. You don't want to not eat at the place you want to not eat at or eat at for 20 years, So each one may not be important, but cumulatively it's very important. Mm-hmm. So it is really important ultimately to have these negotiations where relationship matters, but to do so keeping in mind, the relationship. And so applying strategies of collaboration, cooperation, transparency, trust building, these are really the keys to and thinking about all the win-win opportunities that I'm sure you talk about.
Yeah. Gerta often talks about the concept of infinite games and for us to not look at negotiations, each instance of negotiation in a vacuum, but it's part of, because even if it's someone you're negotiating with and you don't think you'll run into them again, in a career context, the longer you are in the working world, the smaller it gets. There's a good chance you'll probably run into them again, right? They may remember if you really poorly mishandled the negotiation before. They might still feel the sting of that. Who knows how that could impact you down the line.
And I was going to say, here is also another example of why AI might not be good for negotiations, because you lose that human touch to even just an email or a text. And whenever we get emails or texts that you can tell was written by AI, it just feels like it's diluting the relationship a little bit, or like, couldn't you write this yourself? Like, talk to me as the human. And people might think, oh, it's more efficient, or maybe I will communicate more better, but then you lose the human touch. But as you were giving the house buying example, we were looking at each other because Alex actually did the same thing when he was buying a house years ago, also in the Boston area. And you want
so very similar. I wrote a letter, submitted it through my real estate agent. There were multiple offers. And I also, to be honest, I was shameless about pulling the military card or like the veteran card, because I'm like, as someone who is active duty Air Force, and after I leave the military, I really see the next phase of my life with me and my partner, establishing it here. And
but you did fall in love with the house.
I absolutely fell in love with it.
Every word was true, 100% but Alex was not used to advocating for himself, coming from the military.
And I did end up getting it. I think it worked. I put it on the Air Force letterhead.
That's great.
So for anyone buying a home, I think this letter writing strategy goes a long way.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
we have a million other questions, but we should probably let you get back to
teaching the next generation of negotiators.
Yes. But not our competitors.
Yeah.
Any final words on your end?
I really enjoyed this. Yeah, happy to talk negotiations anytime, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for making the time. I know you have a connection to the Berkeley area, so if you're ever in town, we'd love to host you. Maybe there's a part 2 in person. That would be fun. Yeah. Thanks
Yeah,
so much.
thank you so much, Professor, for coming on. I know you insisted that we call you Ofer, but we both come from very hierarchical, like military, like even people that I worked under in the military, after they've retired, they insist on first name, but I still can't get out of the habit of still calling them Colonel, General, Lieutenant Colonel. But thank you so much for coming on. This was an amazing conversation. It was a privilege to have you.
Yeah, it's so special. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.